is me being recovered, does that mean that I no longer have to do the work, or do I still have to do the work? Because for me, I have to do the work. History repeats, history shows that if I let myself feel like I don't need to do the things anymore, then it may not at first turn into addiction, but it will turn into something that will turn into something that will turn into something.
Welcome to Positive Recovery MD. If you're listening, chances are you want to create happiness around you and thrive in your life. We're glad you're here and you've come to the right place. This podcast will inspire and motivate you to not merely survive your recovery journey. We'll give you the tools to build or strengthen your foundation to thrive and flourish in your life. In each episode, we will come together as a community to have authentic conversations around addiction, recovery, and what matters, growth and progress, not perfection, all while developing positive habits for you to utilize. To learn more, please visit positiverecovery.com/podcasts to sign up and to receive the daily positive interventions that we'll review, as well as gain access to exclusive Positive Recovery content available only to Positive Recovery MD listeners. All right, let's get started.
Well, welcome to Positive Recovery MD. I'm Jamie Demeris, and I'm stepping in for Dr. Jason Powers today. Now, you might be wondering where Dr. Powers is. Well, he's up to his elbows in yeast, perfecting his sourdough bread. He says it's therapy for him, and we all know he's just trying to master that perfect sourdough jalapeno cheese bread, or I'm not sure. That's my favorite of his sourdough cheese bread, so I was honored to fill in for him so that he can be at home baking for me. Today, I'm honored to introduce to you our incredible guest. It's Glenn Carosella. He's an LCDC at our Cinco Ranch Positive Recovery. His story is both inspiring and deeply personal. He's 40 years old. He's been navigating the challenges of addiction since he was around 14 years old. Unlike many, his journey didn't stem from trauma or hardship, but from a profound sense of not fitting in. In his search for belonging, he found himself caught up in the dangerous allure of drug use during his teenage years. And while he regrets about some of the choices he made, he doesn't regret the path that ultimately brought him to where he is today. Glenn's been clean and sober since September 12th, 2018, and it took several attempts to get there. Now he dedicates himself to helping others as an outpatient counselor in Texas, and also shares his knowledge with aspiring counselors at Lee College in Baytown. Beyond his professional life, Glenn enjoys immersing himself in fantasy literature and films, spoiling his dogs, swapping inappropriate memes, and cherishing time with his fiancée. So I just have to ask, because at first I thought I was going to say fantasy football, and I'm like, no, not Glenn.
No.
Then I realized, but what's your favorite meme?
Probably, it's funny. I just referenced this last night in group. We were talking about, it's not a funny subject, but we were talking about some legal stuff and those that have DUIs, and basically when the addict or the alcoholic gets caught red-handed, and usually especially if you watch the Facebook reels and stuff of cops pulling people over, it's like, hey, have you been drinking? Nah, no, not at all. It's this body cam footage of this cop walking up on this guy, and the camera's trained at the ground, and then it kind of pans up, and it's this truck that's on its two wheels with a pylon going through it, and it's this dude, and he's like, hey, how you doing tonight, sir? He's like, good. And he's like, have you had anything to drink? And he's like, no, maybe one beer. He's like, oh, okay, one beer. So it's just funny because it just showcases the irrationality, the delusion of living in active addiction, whether it's denial or just, I just can't see it, or I don't want to see it. So that's that's the most appropriate meme I can share on this platform.
It's funny because it reminded me of one of my favorites, same topic, and it actually is right in line with some of the questions that I wanted to ask you about today. It's the one where, I think it was a Cops episode. It really wasn't a meme, but an episode from Cops where the cop's asking the guy, have you been drinking tonight? He's like, no. What about smoking any weed? No. Do you ever smoke weed? No. Do you have any weed on you right now? He's like, no. And then, are you sure? He's like, I'm positive. And then the cop pulls the joint from behind his ear. It's like, denial.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm glad to be here.
I'm glad to have you here. And it's always a pleasure visiting with you, talking with you, or just having fun with you and laughing with you.
Yeah, likewise, man.
Don't take life so seriously. That's what I feel when I'm around you.
It's
It's
a
just
superpower and a curse.
good fun, right? That is true. The topic that we had for today was really around people in early recovery and like when you're getting out of treatment, how do you know when you're genuinely ready to take on the responsibility of independent living versus needing some continual structure in your life, like whether it be outpatient services or sober living and outpatient services, and what your experience is? Because I know that you've dealt with clients that were homeless all the way to clients that were well to do and could go live anywhere they wanted to. What is your experience with that?
You're not letting me off easy. You're coming out the gate with a hard one. And I say a hard one because, one of the biggest things, so I'm going to give you kind of a long, short answer. But I would say the number one thing, in my opinion, in my experience, that a person in early recovery or just recovery in general has to understand and grasp is that the way that our brains work, we have, we're biology, we have all these processes that kind of happen without our permission. And then we have our thinking brain, the prefrontal cortex, the analytical mind. So when a person can go to treatment, 30 days, whatever, and start to feel better. So when a person starts to feel better, their emotions change, their perception changes, and they change for the better. So a person starts to think in a different capacity. It's usually more positive. And let's just say this person really wants to be in recovery. And so we'll come into maybe day one in treatment, really desperate, really broken, go through the process. And then when they're close to getting out, be like, you know what? I feel really good. And then here comes us as staff and clinicians and support groups saying, hey, well, I know you feel good, but you should also continue to do these things. You should go to meetings. You should get a sponsor. You should go to sober living. You should go to outpatient. And it's like, you know what? Like, yeah, I hear you. I hear what you're saying, but I feel really good right now. I feel like I'm okay. Like I don't have any cravings. I'm not thinking about drinking or smoking. I've got my job. I'm going to go to yoga. I'm going to do all these things. And all that, all those ideas and those thoughts come from the analytical mind, the thinking brain, which is the part of our brain that we take so much pride in, the prefrontal cortex. But addiction lives in the biology. And what I mean by biology is just like the lower part of the brain, the mesolimbic dopamine system. So that's the part of the brain that gets hijacked. So when a person feels like they're in a good place and they feel like, yeah, I don't really need to do that. Like I'm in a good place. And then they go out into the world, and whether it's through unexpected crisis or just a period of boredom, that addiction still lives in the biology. That part of the brain has been forever changed, those pathways and those circuits. And so whether it's boredom or just driving down the road, like some of my worst relapses were driving down the road in a good place, just left a meeting, just called my sponsor. And if you would have told me that morning, hey, Glenn, you're going to relapse tonight, I would have argued with you. I'd have been like, there's no way. And then later that night ended up relapsing and completely, putting my life back into chaos. So I say all that to say a person has to understand that's what addiction is. Like you can't outthink addiction. We're not smarter than addiction. Even if we are highly intelligent, credentialed people, like doctors, lawyers, engineers, or just people that have like a lot of intellect, that is still not enough to overpower the addiction, because addiction lives in that lower primal part of the brain that's always talking to the thinking brain. So a person can feel like they're in a good place and they don't need to do this. And then that's down the road when addiction typically sneaks up on them. So just to go back to your initial question, it's hard. Obviously, from a probability standpoint, like rolling the dice, the more things that you throw at the dartboard, the more times you roll the dice, the more variables that you add that support your recovery, your chances of success go through the roof. But it is challenging for people in early recovery to understand that I need to do that, because if I have like, okay, you're telling me I need to go to sober living, but I got kids, a wife, a job, that's not really in the cards. And so that person may not be willing to make that sacrifice. And then ultimately down the road, the addictive patterns come back in. So it's a hard thing to answer, But just to kind of simplify that really long-winded response is the more things that I am willing to incorporate into my recovery path, my arsenal, my tools, the better my probability. I don't really believe in luck personally. I believe in creating our own luck, and I believe luck is essentially probability. So the more things that I can add and do, my chances of success only get greater and greater.
I'll tell you what, like you nailed a hard question. Honestly, I feel like you nailed it perfectly. I mean, it spoke so much to so many different pieces of it. When you talked about some of your relapses, it reminded me of some of mine and how changing a behavior is not done by acquiring knowledge. Because in the book, it clearly states in the beginning, suddenly the thought crossed my mind. I think it's the doctor's opinion or one Bill's story. Suddenly the thought crossed my mind. And like, I can't tell you how many times I had to experience that before realizing like I needed to do it a different way and starting to follow some suggestions. So yeah, because it's, it is a hard question to answer. And some people have to, deny going to come back a second time and say, hey, you know what? I'm going to follow up with that suggestion. And it kind of like leads right into the next question, which is why establishing a daily routine is so important for someone in recovery. And also, how does it contribute to their overall independences? And I'll tie into this with an experience of mine and then let you answer. Like in my early recovery, where it landed, which was in 2006, 17 years of in and out, not landing. I finally followed the suggestions of my sponsor, but it was very routine based. I worked like 3 or 4 hours a day and I went to several meetings and I took the recommendation of not getting into a relationship for a year. And during that time, it was just very patterned, what one might call boring, where I kept asking the question, like, when is it going to happen? And I kept getting the answer, trust me, you're right where you're supposed to be, before I ever got to that place. So like, how important is that structure in early recovery?
I mean, I would say it's not only it's important, like it's essential, it's crucial. Like I don't like telling people that I work with that you have to do things, because typically, when a person is told what they need to do, it's almost like for me, like that childlike defense comes back. It's like, well, just because you told me I have to do it, I don't want to do it, and I'm less willing to do it. But it is essential, because whether it's combating boredom, whether it's distracting, talking about craving and like trigger mitigation and management and how to navigate that. How can I distract myself away from whatever emotional state I find challenging, whether that's anxiety, discomfort, boredom, I've got to learn to be able to navigate those situations, whether it's an actual crisis or whether it's just something seemingly mundane. It's like, I'm just bored and I'm getting antsy and restless. So a routine gives a person an opportunity to do that, and so we can talk about routine from like a Instagram, not that I'm knocking it, I'm just kind of being cheeky about like a bro science perspective, like wake up in the morning, drink your water, eat your athletic greens or drink your athletic greens, get sunlight. Like all those things are wonderful and can absolutely like carry a person a long way. The other part of talking about a routine is like, why am I doing this routine? Like, am I doing a routine just because somebody told me, like, this is just what you do? You just do a routine to kind of, set you on a different path. But a deeper perspective would be like, I'm doing a routine because I'm trying to change something within myself. I'm trying to become more disciplined. I'm trying to become less reactive. I'm trying to become more intentional. I know that's a word that you and I both, have some affinity towards, like, why am I doing the things that I'm doing? Because it's one thing if a person's like, okay, well, y'all told me I should incorporate exercise or walking into my routine. So I can walk and that's fine. And the person will get a lot of benefits out of that. But why am I walking? Well, I'm walking for the psychological benefits. I'm walking for the weight loss benefits. I'm walking just for the fact that every day that I know that I walk, I have that achievement, whether I'm tracking my progress, like today I walked, and I check it off my list or cross it off. And when I have a bunch of things that I can string together consistently, all of a sudden I am a disciplined person and I start to appreciate myself and I develop confidence and I develop self-efficacy, and I start to believe that, okay, well, I've been able to not only stay sober for 60 days, I'm walking every day, I'm reading my daily meditation, I'm journaling. And all those things together can kind of serve as, versions of keystone habits where because I've been able to do these things, what else can I do? And so for me, like routine is building a lifestyle that helps a person navigate the challenges of addiction, but allows us to become a person. Really hate to resort to cliches, but there's always a place for them, like the version of ourself that we love and appreciate, like the best version of ourself. And with that comes like the evolution of, what I started in early recovery and I didn't really have anything going on. Like I'm talking about my story now. Like I don't really like myself. I'm kind of lost. I'm drifting. But now I'm just doing a bunch of little things consistently, walking, journaling, showing up, brushing my teeth, making my bed. And then 6 months down the line, I'm like, you know what? I actually like the way I'm living life now. And with that comes an access into so many other things, authenticity and confidence and like self-efficacy and some of the things. So it's essential. Like routines are essential, but make it your own routine. Don't just do a routine. Do your routine, something that resonates with you.
It's interesting that you brought in your own story to it, because the direction that I was going to go was your early recovery versus today, because when you're in early recovery, like the first 30 days, 60 days, and there's some routines that you did, like some begrudgingly, right, that turned into things that actually turned out to be really good for you. But like to think about the ones you're doing today, to think about them at 30 and 60 days, it could be very overwhelming. So I just wanted to say this for any listeners that might be in early recovery, like the early routines are probably the simplest, most mundane that lead to some of the different ones. So tell me a couple of your early routines that were really powerful for you, and maybe some that you're experiencing now that you never thought.
Yeah, no, I'm glad you brought up the overwhelming nature of it, because when I talk about routines and goals in this way, sometimes my clients will raise their hand and be like, listen, Glenn, like I hear what you're saying, but I'm like 35 days sober. I'm coming out of my skin. My anxiety's still at a 10. And you're like telling me to do all these things. And like it can be very, very daunting. So I completely agree with you. So for me, it was walking for 60 minutes minimum a day. There's something about that hour time frame that was just really transformational for me. Reading, and I wasn't a big journaler, to be honest with you, but I do like writing things down in terms of like goal setting. Like I'm a list maker because I like that reward, that dopamine release, that sense of accomplishment when I can cross things off my list. Like, I've got my list right here. And also it's because I have terrible memory. So if I didn't write anything down, like I'd probably be fired because I wouldn't do anything or I forget everything. But yeah, just walking. I believe in walking, reading. And when I say reading, I really mean ABL, always be learning. So if you don't like to read, because some people are like, Glenn, I can't read. I have concentration problems. I've been on Adderall my whole life and now I can't take Adderall anymore. So I can't focus on the words. That's fine. So to not overwhelm it is, how can I absorb knowledge that I'm interested in, and that can be through reading, but that can also be through audiobooks, podcasts, YouTube shorts, and just, wake up every day. Like when I drive to work in the morning or when I go for a walk, I usually have something in my ear, some kind of podcast, some kind of knowledge. And it's knowledge that I'm interested in. I'm seeking things that are answering questions that I have. Like, how do I get out of my own head? Like, how do I stop worrying about stuff? And I'll go and I'll search a podcast, So I'm not just listening and reading podcasts and books for the sake of reading them. I'm searching for things that are helping me. I mean, I tell my clients all the time, like, I cannot tell you how many times I've gone into YouTube and been like, how to be happy, how to not be depressed, how to not feel suicidal, like really basic questions. And then there you go. You have all different kinds of peoples and perspectives that are talking about their experience and their solutions, and find one that you resonate with and just stay with it. I mean, like, I really like the way that guy talks about this, so walking and learning, absorbing information and seeing how I can apply it to my life. And that's really been transformational.
Those were in early recovery.
Yeah. Early recovery, and they've evolved, but walking was the first one. Walking, and for me, it was reading. It was actually reading books. Like those two things were wonderful. And then, of course, like the basics, like meetings. Like I did 90 meetings in 90 days. Matter of fact, when I got sober this time, that's all I could do because I was so, how do I want to say this? I was not stable. I was sane-ish, jury's out on that, but like psychologically, I couldn't sit in a chair. I couldn't sleep. Like I couldn't have a conversation without like either getting anxious or stumbling over my words or feeling really insecure. So literally my first 90 days and some change of early recovery was just try to eat something, rest, and go to meetings. And for me, I will say on my meetings, because, I am a talker. I've always been a talker, and I've really kind of I've learned to appreciate that about myself. But in previous periods of sobriety, I would get sober and I would go to meetings. I was always the guy that was like sharing. Like I always had to give my opinion. I was always, this time I didn't do that. Like I was so scared and so desperate. And it came from a lot of like a place of fear and self-loathing that I set my behind in these meetings for 90 days and I just listened. And so, you hear some cliches in the room about like, in early recovery, you don't have put the cotton out of your mouth and put it in your ears. Like I get that. But for me, it was like, I really want to learn and understand from people that obviously have a proven track record of doing this, because I don't. So I don't really need to say anything right now, because my pattern that I was trying to break before, so I always had something to say. I always had some kind of opinion, and that really didn't serve me well. So the meetings and the actual recovery work, and of course working the steps and working with my sponsor was part of that routine as well.
It's interesting that you talked about the not speaking in early recovery after speaking for however long. In the 17 years that I was in and out of the rooms, I was the guy that, especially after I went to Kerrville, Texas, where they're hard from the book. Like it was probably the first place that I was truly introduced to the book. And I could recite that book left and right and speak in a meeting and make people think I had 5 years of recovery or more. And I had 15 days. I knew what page number, I could like emphasize in the right ways. Chris R., who was my sponsor at one time, had done a talk about knowledge versus experience. And I don't know where it came from when I sobered up finally for good and for all, but there was one of my early commitments to myself was, if I hadn't experienced it, I won't share it. And so I didn't share for a while. And then by the time I did share, my share was very minimal. And then as time went on, I had more experience and more understanding to offer and share that wasn't an opinion. It was based on experience and the difference you can hear when someone's coming from a passion or something they've experienced. Like I always kind of phrase it like if I interviewed 1,000 women in full detail of what it's like to give childbirth, and I did it for about 6 months straight, and I got on stage with one person who delivered one baby, one woman who delivered one baby, that the one that would land with the crowd the most would be the one who truly experienced it, and not the one that gained a lot of knowledge from different people and tried to describe it. And I feel like it's the same in these rooms, that you have to walk through and experience some of these. When you say they're cliches, I say they're cliches until you experience them, and then they become meaningful.
Yeah. Yeah, no, well said, man. Joe Dispenza is a guy that you and I both follow, and he has this concept, which I don't know if it came from him, but he was the one that where it landed for me. He says there's something that's known as the danger of insight, like in like the self-help world and even in like sometimes clinical spaces where, a person like me will come in, go to treatment, and really, really want it, be open and now we will absorb all this information, take in the curriculum, read the podcast, and that insight, that knowledge will start to make us feel better. Like, I'll start to have these epiphanies and like these realizations. And so I start to feel better. It's almost as if like I can experience what change could look like just by taking in the information. And then I leave like a clinical setting, or I stop going to meetings, and that insight never translates. It's just insight, so it's kind of like what you said. And he calls it the danger of insight because it's kind of like, and I've done this before, where I just absorb like self-help stuff and books and books and books. And then I put the book down and I go into my life and nothing changes. Like, to me, that's terrifying. To me, that's a blind spot that sometimes people that I work with and myself have experienced, where just consuming. And then if somebody were to look at my life, it's like, well, you're just consuming, like nothing's changing. And I'm really passionate and dedicated about bringing awareness to those blind spots and how can we bridge the gap between the insight's great and what's that space, kind of like the Viktor Frankl quote, between stimulus and response, there is a space, and in that space lies our power to choose. I mean, that's the way, like you talk about the pause, Jamie, like being able to take the information and apply it, sometimes starting at a very basic level and then ultimately transforming, and then down the road being like, you know what? I did that. I'm not the same person that I was. Like that is, to me, like one of the most intoxicating, fulfilling aspects about human existence is we all have the ability to do that, but sometimes we need to get to the place where I believe that's possible. So, and that comes from insight. I'm not saying insight's bad in and of itself, but how can I use the insight to transform belief and ultimately change, whatever it is that I would like to change, whether it's emotions, thoughts, or behaviors.
Yeah, because once it's insight, then you have an awareness to it. And in that awareness, you have the opportunity to discern, kind of like the blind spot. And then once the blind spot's revealed, like most of the time you're already past it. You've already crashed, right? And it's
yeah, literally
it's recognizing, it's recognizing and owning the crash in that moment. And then like really playing that tape through or doing some self-reflection on it, because the next time you might catch it right after the crash happens. And then the next time you're catching it as you're tapping it. And then the next time you create that space. You still don't know what to do, but you create that space.
Right.
It's so funny though that you talked about that, because I've talked about this like 3 times in the last week. My very first treatment center, 1989. It was off of 1960. It was called...
Damn, 1989. How old are you? Like 60?
1989. No, I was 2 when I went to treatment the first time. No, 1989. I was 19 years old. I was born in 1970. I'm 54. Thanks for pointing that out.
You're welcome.
But it was my first treatment center, right? And they actually brought out the book and went through the book, and we read it and would have a big book study. And I was like blown away. I'm like, oh my God, this is the way to live. And I can't wait to get out and share it with my family and my cousins and my friends to show them how they need to live. I wasn't going to do the work. I already saw the inside of how great it was, right? And you think that the insight's going to have you going out there and living that great life. But what you don't know is where in that work that your way of being changes. That's the divine part of it. Like even where in the work of the insight of the blind spot, like you like to cause it, does all of a sudden this space get created? Because left to our own devices, we can't pause when we're angry. We get angry. Anger just happens. It's not something you sit there and you have space to choose it. It happens. And then once you're aware of it, now you can choose to stay or get out of it. And yeah. I don't know. We're going deep into that question.
Nah, that's okay, man. That's what we do, Jamie. Like that's what we do, man. And it's what we do well. It's funny. You mentioned the pause when agitated. And I always say like from like a bumper sticker thing, like pause when agitated. Yeah. Like, that really makes sense to me, which it's really easy to do, except when I'm agitated, so.
Exactly. Pause when agitated. How?
Right.
The momentum's carried me too far. I get agitated really quick, very far.
Yep.
No.
Yep.
And it's so funny because you'll work on it in specific situations and you'll nail it. And it's, I guess it's the layers of the onion they talk about in the rooms, because you'll have certain situations where you'll feel the anger coming on and you can pause it. You can discern and you can change your beliefs and thoughts about it and go down a different way of handling this particular instance. Then you got some other ones like the layers are so deep that you don't even know where the birthplace, like what for me, like what decade the birthplace was born in of that particular belief system.
Yeah.
The lifelong process of work. So let's get back onto the lighter things and talk about like how important are hobbies and extracurricular activities in early recovery. And I'm going to tie this into a second question. You can probably answer them together and I know everybody's got responsibilities, and it's probably one of the hardest challenges when coming out of treatment. You got to get back to work and start putting your attention on the things that you weren't putting attention on in your addiction, like catching up on your bills or getting out of debt or going to the doctor and the dentist Like I love it. And it happens all the time where people's priorities all of a sudden come into play in the admission process of coming into treatment. Yeah, I'm going to come in, but I got to go and take care of this, and this first because I've been putting it on for way too long. But when you get out, like you want to get back to work and start taking care of those things. But where's that balance in the joyful things that really bring you joy?
Yeah, no. So like just talking about hobbies. So it's kind of impossible for me to talk about this without going into authenticity a little bit, but just at a really kind of like basic level is, we talked about.
Well, before you do that, go into what authenticity is when you speak of it.
So authenticity is just me being me, but even saying that, like that's such a simple way to talk about something that is not simple. Just with the nature of how we grow up in kind of normal society is, we're born as children and we're kind of like open and curious and infinite, touching things and exploring the world. And then typically we experience how it was referred to me as the split. It's like a child grows up and then they're just being a kid and laughing. And then something happens typically from like a parental figure or an adult where it's like one day, let's say the child at home is very curious and open and all the things I just described. And then the child is at dinner with their parents and the child is doing the same thing. It's being open and loud and gregarious. And then the adult might go, "Hey, stop, you're being too loud right now. You need to sit down. Like this is not appropriate." And so what that does is the child will, especially a young child, like doesn't really know how to internalize that other than like, oh, obviously something about myself is inappropriate. So I need to change this or hide this or quell this part of myself. And that's what's known as the split, where it's like our lives start to diverge. And it's like, here was this person that didn't have any self-doubt and just kind of just did, and then experienced some aspects about life where it's like, oh, okay, well, I can't be this way in this setting. Mom and dad said I need to be quiet when there's company over. I can't act this way at school because I get made fun of. And we start to fracture ourselves. And so authenticity is kind of like coming full circle and realizing that version of ourselves, like I'll call it the inner child, although I'm not super familiar with like inner child work, but like that version of ourselves that was open and curious, like that's closer to who we are even today than these kind of like layers and these things that we get attached to, like our jobs and roles. And, not that those things are bad, but authenticity is getting reacquainted with what's underneath that. And hobbies are a big part of that. Like, that's why I have, not so much at this office, but that is why I have all this goofy stuff in my office, because I remember when I got older and nobody really told me this, but I was like, okay, I'm kind of an adult now. Like it's not really appropriate for me to have collectibles and action figures. That was something that I did as a kid. So I need to kind of just not, how do I want to say this? Like not hide it, but I just felt like that's a part of me that's been long gone. And so when I got sober, I really wanted to figure out who I was. Like I was desperate because I wanted to get sober, but I was left with a lot of questions. Like, who am I? What do I do with my life? Where do I go? What do I like? What are my strengths? Blah, 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 blah. And I wanted those questions answered because I felt like if I didn't answer those questions, I was not going to be okay. And part of that journey and exploring things took me back to realizing, like, for me, how I incorporate like my fun stuff is leaning back into those hobbies. Like I collect collectibles. I have an extensive Pokemon card collection, that I'm not ashamed of, and I have them categorized in little individual sleeves, and I sell them and collect them, and I do it because it makes me happy. So for a person that's in early recovery, if they're in that, they want to figure stuff out. Like, what are some things that you could lean into that you used to like maybe before the addiction started or as a kid, like whether it's bike riding, if you were a child that liked to spend a lot of time outdoors, like how can you do that as an adult? Like hiking, rucking, maybe using like integrating with some of the Phoenix events where it's like, okay, well, these people are going on nature walks. Like I'm going to start doing that. When I was a kid, maybe you like to color or, like getting into adult coloring books or taking a painting class. But, we talk a lot about in this space about you have to have fun in recovery, but a person should be able to sit down and be really honest and intentional about like, okay, I may not know what I like to do. Like that's probably one of the hardest questions that we ask our clients when they come in. We're like, what do you like to do? What are your hobbies? What are you into? And they go, I don't know. I've been in active addiction for 20 years. Like I couldn't tell you what I like. I think that they sometimes believe that in that space. But if we have an honest conversation about, okay, well, what did you used to like before that? What kind of movies were you into? What did you like to read? What did you like to talk about? What did you like to explore or think about when you would play make believe by yourself? So what's the adult version of that? Not that the adult version's any different, but how can I lean into that stuff? You know, that's where hobbies come from. You know, I have one of our alumni that I really enjoy talking with this individual, because this individual on the surface has like a really badass job, like really serious, like really high paying, you know, kind of executive, but they have this like extensive Lego collection. And they'll come in and be like, hey, Glenn, I just want to show you, like, I bought like this $700 Lego set, and it's like this Harry Potter village. And they're totally cool with that. And this person's like almost 50 years old. Like, that's okay. So what is your version of that? And how can I lean into that? And that's so important, not from a hobby standpoint and distracting, you know, boredom or mitigating boredom, but to really kind of get in touch with like who I am and what I like. And so that to me is what leads into authenticity. Like I love being a nerd. You know what I mean? I'm not ashamed of it anymore. And there's a big part of my life that I was ashamed of it.
Authenticity. I had to pause you there, and I'm glad that I didn't distract you and take you down a path where you forgot where you were going. And it was such a big word for me when I uncovered it. I was 10 years sober when I heard the word and started to identify what it meant. Like the way you put it and described what authenticity was, I have a short version that I heard, and it aligns with yours, but it's like the Cliff Notes.
Come on, give me the Cliff Notes.
When we're born from like 1 to 5, 6, 7 years old, everything our parents say is God. It's the word. It's what's spoken, and it's our belief. What they say is the truth. They don't lie, and they know everything. Then they start to uncover that wasn't true. So they start to rebel. We start to rebel, trying to be somebody different than that. And we start doing things that aren't us either. And then by the time we become adults, we realize that neither one of those were true. Now we have to find, who are we?
Now we have to find
process. Yeah. We have to uncover it, because I'll never forget in the 6th grade, 7th grade, I had a Michael Jackson poster on my bedroom door, and my friends laughed at it. And there was something about him that I was drawn to, and I didn't figure it out until 10 years ago when I really started doing some really deeper work, where I really started looking within. And really what it was I was never authentic because I always wanted to love. And guys don't love. Guys don't cry.
Right.
Guys hold it together.
Right.
And then you get around guys that are talking about females, and you're trying to fit in, but you're not really you. Then you start battling addiction. You go around your family, and your family's wanting you to show up a certain way. So you start trying to show up the way your family wants you to show up, but you can't show up the way that you are because they don't get addiction. So you never really get a chance to be authentic. And honestly, I think that's the power of the rooms. You walk into the rooms and everybody gets you. I just felt it in my body. People get you. And then you start to identify with people that are being authentic and real, that are talking about stuff that we never talked about before. And then you start to uncover like who you are. And it's a process. But I also think it's also hard, because when people ask me what I do for fun, it's probably one of my most challenging questions, because, man, after battling addiction for so many years and missing out where everybody else learned how to have relationships, manage money, put together resumes and work, etc., like there's a lot of serious stuff that you got to tackle. And that fun doesn't seem to fit into the equation. You almost feel guilty. Plus, in order to have fun, you got to go try a bunch of new things, and you don't want to waste time trying new things because you may not like it.
Right.
So it's a daunting task, but an important one, because you have to have fun. To me, human connection's where it lies.
You articulated that beautifully. Yeah, I am 100% on board with everything you just said.
What's your belief on recovery as a lifelong journey versus I am recovered? I know it's a controversial topic. We're not here to be controversial. Like you can speak authentically or you can go behind the scenes and kind of talk both ways. No, I'm kidding.
Well, since we just got off the subject of authenticity, like I have to speak authentically. So when it comes to recovered, like there's like the AA definition of, kind of like recovered, like we recovered from a hopeless state of mind and body. And then there's kind of like the clinical, practical, real world. It's interesting. This is something that I've been kind of mulling over in my head because I've dealt with a lot of clients specifically at this location that really struggle with the labels. I don't like to refer, like I'm down with abstinence and I'm down with like being sober or clean, but I don't like the word addict. I don't like the word, addiction. Like I don't like to associate those cells with me. And what I found is a lot of times people that struggle with those labels will tend to more often than not ascribe to a belief of like, I'm cured. Like once I get this, I'm no longer an addict. I'm recovered, which yes, we do recover from a hopeless state of mind and body, but recovered is not, I'm not cured. And we're getting into semantics and word games here, but like from a biological perspective, like I always like to come back through the lens of biology because biology to me is irrefutable. Like yes, we can alter our biology, but biology does what biology does. You know what I mean? And so for me, recovery means I'm actively in some way working towards a life that's different than the life I used to live. So whatever that means, like to me, I feel like recovery is, yes, it's the meetings and the sponsor, which I still do that. I have a sponsor, I have a sponsee. So I do the work, but also from like living in recovery, am I going this way? Yes, it's like this sometimes, but am I ultimately trying to be better? Like, am I trying to live in integrity? Do I put my shopping cart back? Do I not throw trash out of my window? Do I not when I used to smoke, do I not throw my cigarette butts on the ground? Can I do simple better? And so, the difference between recovery and recovered is it's a very personal decision. But for me, I have to be honest and be like, is me being in recovery or is me being recovered, does that mean that I no longer have to do the work? Or do I still have to do the work? Because for me, I have to do the work. Like if I don't stop progressing, then I will stagnate. History repeats. History shows that if I let myself feel like I don't need to do the things anymore, then it may not at first turn into addiction, but it will turn into something that will turn into something that will turn into something. And then I'll be in a state of mind and body where I'm like, I'm so miserable or uncomfortable right now. The only thing I can do is do what I know how to do to take it away. So I'll share a quick story. Whenever I was, I stepped into with this company, I stepped into a director role, an executive, managerial role. And if I'm being honest, like it was very challenging for me. It's not something that I'd ever done before. And I was doing it, but like mentally, I was really not doing well. I was overwhelmed and I was stressed. And I wasn't doing the things that I know work for me to keep my head above water. And I started to slip back into a state of mind that was unfamiliar to me in recovery. I started to think emotionally and with thought patterns the way that I used to think in my addiction, which was very nihilistic, like this doesn't matter. I don't care. I'm going to quit this job. I'm going to walk away. And I stopped doing the things and I really went down very, very, very quickly. And so it was, I don't know who it was, but it was somebody in recovery that pulled me aside and was like, Glenn, your job is not your recovery. You've got to still, like, I know that you work long hours and you have all these new responsibilities and you're stressed and you have to figure out a way to still do that. But you also still have to do what works for you. And I heard that advice, but I didn't start acting on it until it was a moment of crisis when I was sitting, it was Tuesday. I'll never forget this. It was Tuesday and I was sitting at my desk and it was like 2:30 and I had like 4 pages of things that were unhighlighted that I had to do. And I was like, I'm going to quit. Like, I'm just going to get up and I'm going to walk out and I'm going to drive away. And I knew that that was so irrational and it was coming from a place of emotion, but that was what my biology, like literally my emotional self and my fearful self was telling me to do. And so I didn't quit. I walked out of the office and I walked down the street and I sat down on the curb and I got on the phone and I went right back to basics and I called 7 people. 5 of them were in recovery, sponsor, colleague, friend, and then 2 of them were just support group people. And I said, hey, I'm not doing well. I need you to talk me off a ledge. And I just went down and I just did the steps. And what that allowed me to do was to get through the day. So for me, recovery is, I'm never going to be cured. Addiction's always in me, whether I ascribe to the label of addict or somebody that's in long-term recovery, like semantics aside, but I'm somebody that if I don't take care of this stuff, I will eventually find a way to use something inappropriate to take away the way that I feel.
Yeah, man, so much in all of what you said. I think the important piece on that, because I like the word I am recovered. I also have been in a few situations where I'm like, I'm so glad that I'm where I am and I'm as grounded as I am and that I'm as tuned in as I am, because where I'm at right now in the past would have led me to drink or drug again. And for me to drink or drug again is to run the risk of dying, because I don't know when I'm returning. That's the part that I don't ever want to forget. But at the same time, like what you spoke of in that moment where you were having those irrational thoughts and you didn't quit your job, space between stimulus and response. And your response that you chose, not reacted to, because most of the time it's just a reaction, was to do the small things that we learn to do in early recovery, which is why it's so important, I believe, that early foundation in recovery that I talked about earlier. For the first year, I was going to meetings all day long, kept asking my sponsor, when am I going to start to see the promises? And he kept saying, trust me, you're right where you're supposed to be. And then one day I went to this event and I saw this guy and asked him if he would hire into a certain position without having to start at the ground up. And he said, come see me on Monday. And I put on my suit that barely fit, went into his office, was authentic with him and spoke straight, and walked out of there for the first time in my life making 6 figures. And what I did not know was that what was going to be required of me during those first 2 years that I was working there. I was working, it was in the car business. I was working 60 hours a week as a finance manager. But the truth is, if I hadn't built my foundation in recovery, that would have driven me to drink quickly. I finally left that industry and realized that it was my survival tool for so long, that there was something else that was more fulfilling for me out there. It took me a little time to find it, but I love working in this field because it gives meaning to my life, which I believe I hear from you as well. So let's speak to that. Like, how important is purpose and meaning for someone, and how did it evolve for you in recovery?
Meaning and purpose is not a simple thing to talk about. It's very subjective. Like, what is meaning? But I do know, like for me and a lot of people that I work with, is when asked about meaning, especially if it's never been explored, it's like, I have no idea. Like, I have no idea what meaning is. And again, with the subjective nature of meaning, like it's a personal journey. So everybody's got to figure it out on their own way. But there are 2 quotes that I love that kind of contextualize my version of meaning that makes sense for me, because meaning today is not a complicated thing. So the first quote is, the meaning of life is to give life meaning. So that's something that I can reach out and access at any time. Can I give meaning to my experience when I'm walking 3 miles at Katie Mills Mall on my lunch break, when I'm interacting with my fiance, when I'm sitting down with my parents? Like, I can choose how I internalize that situation in whatever way I want. Can I internalize this as an annoyance, as a frustration, as something that I have to do, or is it something that I get to do? Is it something that I can, be present for? And then the other quote is that, the purpose and meaning of life is to find the things that you like and do the things that you want to do, and, for me, like, if I had to kind of put a little parentheses in that second quote, it's, obviously, like, just don't do whatever you want. For me, it's not okay for me to hurt people or, lie, cheat, and steal and just cause more harm. But like, I do like to have fun. Like, I like to do what I want to do. If I want to go see a movie, if I want to, eat a good meal, if I want to explore something new, then I get to do that. And so it's very simple for me. Meaning is something that we create, but it's also about, like, how am I contextualizing and internalizing what I'm experiencing in a way that is profound and meaningful for me. Like, those two quotes are all I need for meaning. The meaning of life is to give life meaning, and the purpose and meaning of life is to find the things that we enjoy and do the things that we want to do.
Right. It's pursuing happiness in the right way.
Yeah.
It's doing the things that fulfill us. It's interesting and it's only because of the conversation we had when you said that, I thought of like how my parents were the ones that taught me about the Greek Orthodox religion and gave it meaning. And then they're also the ones that told me drugs were bad for me. Right. But at some point I took the meaning that they had shared with me and I changed it on drugs and alcohol. And I gave drugs and alcohol a meaning of things that I like to do for fun. Then they took on a different meaning for me because they really started to destroy my life. But now, in hindsight, I look back at it and the meaning that I give it is like it led me right to where I'm supposed to be, doing what really fulfills me and having me live an authentic life that I get to just be real. And for me, that's fulfilling. Now I get to experience it as I raise a child, knowing like, how do I want to instill this in my children to help them and guide them towards a path where hopefully they find their authenticity quicker, right? Or give them the easier path. And the truth is we don't know, because sometimes it's our greatest struggles that become our biggest assets. And I think that's why we're so passionate in what we do.
Yeah. No, well said, man. Absolutely.
So if you were going to leave us with one final thought,
I would say whatever a person's pursuing or whatever their path is, recovery path, growth path, self-improvement path is, for me, it's to learn to think greater than I feel. So what that means is I don't believe that I can be successful in life or recovery. And I have an emotion that's associated with that: fear, anxiety, whatever. And a lot of those emotions come from very real places. They come from the past and they come from previous experience. So past, typically, unexamined, kind of makes it seem like I know where I'm going. Well, I've had 6 relationships that have failed. Why would the 7th work? And so thinking greater than I feeling is because we use a lot of thought, like it's what we do, but a lot of times the way we think is not very helpful. So if I'm thinking about something that I want to do, and then I have an emotion that's associated with that thought, that's like an emotion of lack or self-doubt, and then I believe that emotion and I think through the lens of that emotion, then I don't end up doing or accomplishing the things that I want to do. So thinking greater than I feel is just doing the thing. Like, I was trying not to resort to saying that, but I'll give an example and then that'll be the end of it. Let's say my goal is to pick up that action figure up there. Like, it's kind of a silly example, but that's what I've written it down. It's my SMART goal, specific measure. I want to pick up that action figure. I know that's what I want. And so substitute action figure with weight loss, sobriety, success, owning a business, whatever. So I have a thought and I'm using my brain to come up with that goal. So now I've got a plan. Okay, I'm going to pick up that action figure tomorrow. Tomorrow's the day. And then I start thinking about picking up that action figure. And I'm like, you know what? Tomorrow's Saturday, though. I usually relax on Saturday. You know what? It's really far away. It's kind of heavy. You know what? I actually don't know if I want to pick up that action figure. I don't know if I'm going to be able to pick up that action figure. So all those thoughts create emotions. And a lot of those emotions create barriers for me just going over there and picking up the thing. So it's kind of like I'm kind of getting into a convoluted answer, but thinking greater than I feel is like I can feel however I want about picking up that thing. But my thought is I'm just going to go do it. So it's a very simple thought that trumps those emotions of self-doubt, worry, and anxiety, and just building the habit of like, I'm just going to go for a walk. I'm just going to apply for the job. I'm just going to ask the girl out. I'm just going to ask the boy out. Not in the first year of recovery, though. Just saying. I'm just kidding. But like, I'm just going to think. I'm going to use my brain to establish what I want to do. And I'm going to create as little space of emotion, especially like maladaptive emotion, and I'm just going to do it. So I'm going to go pick up the action figure and then just be like, okay, stand up and go pick it up. So thinking greater than I feel is emotions are, oh man, I'm really getting long winded on this. So yeah.
Yeah, let me help you here, because what I heard is it's not really help you. Let me add to what you said. Human beings are predictable because we're creatures of habit. I stick my hand out to someone without saying a word, they're going to reach out and shake my hand. I didn't ask them to shake my hand, but we're creatures of habit, which is why human beings keep repeating the past. We don't realize how much the past is limiting what's possible in the future. You said something earlier about finding the things that you love, and that's a hard thing to do in early recovery. It's because we've forgotten so much about the things we love, and we don't even think that the things that we used to love will be fun anymore, that we can't even bring them to the forefront of our thought. And it's limiting what's possible in the future because we don't think going to a game is going to be fun anymore, or going and picking up an art class is going to be fun anymore. We believe that it won't be, but we never give it a chance.
Right.
And I think Joe Dispenza said this as well. People always ask, why can't I get any greater than where I am? Why do I keep pulling in these toxic relationships? In order to get something greater than our present circumstances, we have to learn to speak, think, and feel greater than our present circumstances. Otherwise, what we usually do when we talk to people is we go and we tell them what we're up to, what we're doing, right? Yeah, yesterday I did this, this, and this, and I'm doing this. I'm thinking about this, but we never just get present and say, you know, what I'm creating is this, and get real intentional about what we're creating in our future, and then declaring it, like owning it in the emotion. And I believe that's tying this right back to early recovery. We have to smash the illusion that we can someday drink like other people. And we have to declare to our innermost selves that we are alcoholic, right? And when we walk in the rooms, we're thinking greater than our present circumstances, even though like we aren't sure if it's going to happen. But if we keep going into those rooms long enough, we keep hearing the experience and hope of other people that have done it before us, all of a sudden, we start to feel greater than what those present circumstances were.
Absolutely.
Wow.
So
what a conversation.
What a conversation. So let me leave one, like a final thought.
See, I told you.
In a really short way.
Done.
So you had asked me, Jamie, like, can you leave like a final thought? So related to recovery, if you don't do anything right, or if your day's completely you're just kind of lost in swimming, just stay. So it's kind of like if I can just put together a bunch of days where, man, today completely went to hell in a handbasket, my mental health's crazy, I don't know if I'm going to make it, just stay. Because if I can put together, it's kind of like a version of the one day at a time. If I can just put together a bunch of days where I just stayed in the fight, then eventually I'll get to a point where it's like, wow, look where I'm at and I'm really in it. So just for anybody that's struggling, for anybody that doesn't believe it's possible, just stay for today.
Yeah, that's a good one.
You're a good one, Jamie.
Stay meaning don't drink, don't use. Just stay in recovery today. Don't stay on this podcast because we won't be here in about 5 minutes.
Yeah.
As we wrap this up. Yes, Glenn, it was
I've got to go to the bathroom.
You do?
Yeah. I always have to go to the bathroom. I'm 40 years old. It's like what you do when you get to middle age. You can't sleep and everything hurts and you have to go to the bathroom all the time.
Yeah, but you want to know something like that's like going back to authenticity, because Glenn and I's conversations never end. Going back to authenticity, like there are certain things that at an early age we were told you don't talk about with other people. And so all of a sudden you hold it in and you don't want to talk about it, but you can't just tell someone, hey, I have to go because I have to use the restroom, even though every single human being in the entire existence of the world does it.
Right.
But we have to be inauthentic, make something up, and then go in there and then hope that everything walks in there after us.
Hope that everything comes out okay. I don't know.
And that's a wrap with Glenn and Jamie Demeris at Positive Recovery MD. I hope Dr. Powers asks me to co-host again in the future. Maybe he doesn't make it to the end of this podcast.
He's like, you two never again will get in front of a camera as far as I live. No, thank you, Jay. Thank you, Jamie. I always like talking to you, man. We always jump off the deep end in the best way possible.
Yeah. So when's the day? Tell everybody, because Glenn just recently got engaged. That's the fruits of recovery. Not only do you prosper in your life and your career, you actually, after having countless failed relationships, get engaged to get married.
Countless, innumerable.
And failed is not the right word, right?
I mean,
you don't fail in a relationship. You just don't mesh with the person. You're still trying to find your authenticity. And then when you find that person, you finally realize, this is me.
But the date is, so I'm going to be getting married to the love of my life on April 11th, 2026. So.
Awesome. Congratulations.
Thanks, man.
Congratulations on all your successes. And until we meet again, and to all the listeners, just stay.
Just stay.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Positive Recovery MD. Don't forget to visit positiverecovery.com/podcast to sign up to get your daily positive interventions sent straight to your inbox. Be sure to subscribe to Positive Recovery MD on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to your podcasts to receive an automatic download when a new episode drops. And as always, if you or someone you know needs help, visit positiverecovery.com or call 877-4-SOBRIETY. That's 877-476-2743. Our why is simple. We care. We are here to help.